In 2008, one man was sitting on a $7 billion empire. He'd been knighted by a Caribbean government. He flew private everywhere, 6 planes, a 112-foot yacht. Wall Street regulators looked the other way for 20 years. And the whole thing was completely fake. This is the story of Allen Stanford, the Ponzi scheme that made Madoff look almost amateur. Not because it was bigger, but because of how long he got away with it. Before the yachts, before the private islands, Allen Stanford was just a kid from Mejia, Texas, population 7,000. His dad was the mayor. He went to Baylor University, got a finance degree, nothing special. His first business? A bodybuilding gym. It failed. But here's where the story gets interesting. In the early 1980s, the Texas oil bubble burst. Real estate prices cratered. Everyone was running away from Houston property. Stanford and his father did the opposite. They bought. Depressed real estate, dirt cheap. And when the market recovered years later, they made a fortune. Now, this part matters. That first fortune was legit. Stanford actually made real money in real estate. And that's the key to understanding every great Ponzi scheme. They almost always start with something real. Because you need that first pile of real money to build the credibility that lets you steal the next pile. By 1993, Stanford's father retired. Allen took over. 500 employees, a real financial company, real profits. And then he moved to the Caribbean. And everything changed. In 1985, Stanford opened a bank on the island of Montserrat, called it Guardian International Bank. When British regulators started cracking down on Montserrat's offshore banking industry, he didn't shut down. He just moved, packed up the whole operation and relocated to Antigua in 1990, renamed it Stanford International Bank. Here's what the bank offered: certificates of deposit, CDs, that paid a premium interest rate over what any U.S. bank was offering. Not crazy high, just consistently higher. Like, if a U.S. bank was paying 4%, Stanford's bank was paying 6 or 7%. Every single year. For 20 years. And the marketing was beautiful. Stanford's brochures said the bank invested depositors' money in highly conservative, marketable securities that were highly liquid. They said the assets were globally diversified, overseen by money managers at top-tier financial institutions, with an additional layer of oversight by analysts in Memphis, Tennessee. It sounded like the safest investment on earth, better returns than a U.S. bank, supposedly conservative, supposedly liquid, supposedly audited. None of that was true. Only 10 to 15% of the bank's assets were actually invested the way they claimed. The rest, billions of dollars, Stanford diverted into his own personal companies, as undisclosed loans to himself. Let me say that again. He took depositors' money and loaned it to himself. Billions of dollars. And the companies he funded? They ran at a net loss every single year. Hundreds of millions in losses, covered by your deposits. If you're finding this wild, and trust me, it gets way crazier, do me a favor and hit subscribe. I go deep on financial stories like this every week, and the next one I'm covering makes this look like a warm-up. Also, drop a comment. Have you ever been offered an investment that seemed too good to be true? I want to hear your stories. So where did the money go? Let me paint the picture. Stanford bought a 112-foot yacht, plus support vessels, 6 private planes, gambling trips to Las Vegas. But that's just the personal spending. The real money went to building his image. And this is where Stanford was smarter than Madoff. Madoff hid. He avoided attention. Stanford did the exact opposite. He bought attention. He sponsored professional cricket, the Stanford Super Series, with a $20 million purse. He flew in legendary West Indian players. He built a cricket ground in Antigua. He was seen on television, shaking hands with billionaires and celebrities. He was knighted by the Antiguan government. Sir Allen Stanford, a knight. running a Ponzi scheme. And he gave millions to politicians, in Antigua and in the United States. Campaign contributions, charitable donations, luxury events and holiday parties. Every dollar spent was an investment in credibility. Because the more important you look, the fewer questions people ask. Now here's the part that should make you angry. This wasn't just one guy fooling everyone. The system helped him. Stanford paid bribes from a Swiss slush fund at Societe Generale to C.A.S. Hewlett, the auditor who was supposed to be independently verifying the bank's finances. Hewlett signed off on everything. No independent appraisals, no real audits. Just a signature in exchange for cash. And it went deeper. Stanford bribed Leroy King, the head of Antigua's Financial Services Regulatory Commission, the man whose job was to regulate Stanford's bank. King was literally on Stanford's payroll while he was supposed to be overseeing him. But what about U.S. regulators? Here's the thing. The SEC investigated Stanford multiple times, starting as early as the 1990s, and every time, they let him go. Not because they couldn't find anything, but because they didn't follow through. The SEC's own internal watchdog later said the agency had missed multiple red flags over the years. So you had an auditor on the take, a regulator on the take, and a U.S. agency that kept looking the other way. That's not a con man getting lucky. That's a system that failed on every single level. And then the 2008 financial crisis hit, and everything collapsed. Two things happened simultaneously. New CD sales dried up, nobody was investing in offshore banks during a crash, and existing depositors panicked. They wanted their money back. Record redemptions. A Ponzi scheme only works as long as new money comes in faster than old money goes out. When that equation flips, the game is over. Stanford tried one last move. He announced that he was personally investing $741 million of his own money into the bank to strengthen its capital base. A show of confidence. A lie. To support that lie, Stanford's internal accountants took a piece of real estate that SIB had purchased earlier that year for $63.5 million. And on paper, they inflated its value by 5,000% to $3.1 billion. No independent appraisal, no improvements to the property. Just wrote down a new number. 5,000%. February 17, 2009. The FBI raided Stanford's offices in Houston, Memphis, and Tupelo. Treated it like a crime scene. Told employees not to leave fingerprints. Stanford tried to flee. Called a private jet company. Tried to pay with a credit card for a flight to Antigua. The company refused. They only accepted wire transfers. His own money was frozen. 2 days later, the FBI found him at his girlfriend's house near Fredericksburg, Virginia. The empire was over. In March 2012, after a 6-week trial, a federal jury convicted Allen Stanford on 13 of 14 counts. Wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, obstruction of justice. The judge sentenced him to 110 years in federal prison. He is currently at Coleman II Penitentiary in Florida. His scheduled release date? March 13th, 2103. He'll be 153 years old. The court also imposed a personal money judgment of $5.9 billion. But here's the devastating part. The judge said it would be impracticable to issue a restitution order. Translation: most victims will never get their money back. During sentencing, a victim named Jaime Escalona said, "Mr. Stanford, you took advantage of the trust that is placed in U.S. companies and caused losses that prevented families from being able to pay for medical and basic living expenses." Angie Shaw, founder of the Stanford Victims Coalition, said, "This was not a bloodless financial crime carried out on paper. It was, and is, an inconceivably heinous crime. Many of the victims had lived the proverbial American dream, only to have it snatched away from them in the name of greed. So what do you take away from this? Because this isn't just history. This is a playbook that's still being used today. First, consistent above-market returns are always a red flag. Not sometimes, always. Stanford's bank paid slightly more than U.S. banks for 20 straight years. That's not skill. That's not genius investing. That's a red flag the size of a building. Second, offshore means less oversight. Stanford deliberately operated out of Antigua because the regulatory environment was weak. And then he corrupted the one regulator who was there. If someone is telling you to move your money offshore for better returns, ask who's watching the watcher. Third, credibility can be manufactured. The cricket tournaments, the knighthood, the political donations, the luxury events. None of that meant Stanford was legitimate. It meant he was good at looking legitimate, and most people can't tell the difference. And finally, the SEC investigated this man multiple times and didn't stop him. The auditor was paid off. The regulator was paid off. The system that was supposed to protect you didn't. So you have to protect yourself.